seconds. Right, pull altitude is 2000 AGL.
Activision's yearly festive treat is back, and even less appears to have changed. The lack of spectacle and any meat in the campaign barely above Black Ops 4 on that score was already covered in our review, but the tech, art and performance have always been core pillars of duty the series delivers. The engine remains relatively static since the start of current generation, now in its 9th iteration of the IW engine, some regression with Cold War's Black Ops 3 engine's ray trace shadows no longer present. The PC offers DLSS and FSR2 options, and these are required even on my RTX 3080 for 4K 60 extreme settings, which is good context for the console settings and performance. Dual modes remain on all three consoles, offering a high-resolution 60fps mode or a reduced quality but 120 fps mode. The real difference between the modes are as follows. Series X and PlayStation 5 in that base 60Hz mode, effectively the default on all non-120Hz screens, are identical. A full 3840 by 2160 is the output with identical settings, and this is from a reconstructed and/or dynamic base of 1920 by 2160, as per the previous two releases. Series S sports almost matching visuals, aside some small reductions on textures, alpha, filtering, bloom and shadows, but the biggest is resolution, which is now 2560 by 1440, scaling and or building from a 1280 by 1440p base. The base 60Hz image quality on the Series S is okay, but it's actually worse than the PlayStation 5 and Series X 120Hz mode. Although it is very minor and certainly not something you notice during play. The 60fps mode on PS5 and Series X is boring from an analysis perspective, but great from a gameplay one. Using one of the heaviest levels in the game, we get a locked and stable 60fps readout from both Series X and PS5 here, with a swamped post-processing, alpha, enemies and lights not causing any deviation from that, and later levels back this up as they are less stressful than this. And you can be sure that this is a great mode for both console owners. Now all versions likely run an adaptive VSync that helps maintain any dips below that 16 millisecond frame time to still feel as fluid as the game often does.
Enemies incoming!
But Series S is the only one where that showed up in my testing, and this is because it struggles to stay close to that 60fps target on some levels. This opening and largely most impressive mission is the worst case scenario, likely bandwidth and fill rate bound in this heavy rain, bloom, light, shadows and action here. It can tear itself to death, staying around the mid 40s to low 50s, but it can dip worse in some other sections. It is here that VRR is required, as this runs on 60 and 120Hz modes, and for the Series S it is required to improve the fluidity and these horrific tearing moments in these stressful sections. Not every level is this bad, but these are worst case scenarios I'm showing. The opened levels that are really just multiplayer Warzone maps jammed into a single player as a mission are more Battlefield than anything yet from the COD team, although they are fun. The AI is terrible, it plays like a standard Warzone game with bots, but these are not as taxing on the GPU and possibly lean more on the CPU with the open, wide levels, high geometry, when in this faster 120Hz mode. At 60fps though, these missions present a much better job at keeping within the 16 millisecond time, and here, with VRR enabled at 60fps thanks to my Elgato HD60X capture card, we only drop a handful of frames and this resolves the tearing. Now the real MVP of such a high-octane, fast-paced shooter, certainly online, is a high refresh rate, and this is where that 120Hz mode really comes into its own, which all three offer. You need to enable this in your operating system. For PlayStation 5, this is in the game option set to default or performance, and then the 120Hz set to automatic, which will then give you this extra option in the menu to turn 120Hz on or off. Series X and Series S need to just have the 120Hz output set in the main menu before you boot up the game, and then you can choose. In addition to this, and all my capture is using VRR, to enable this you need to have VRR enabled in your OS. Again, from those same menus on series consoles, at least gaming only or always on will ensure this is on for both modes, and PS5 is the same TV menu with it set to auto here. It will be on once you play the game, but if your TV doesn't support either of these modes, they'll either be grayed out or they'll fail when you try to enable them.
3, 2, 1, execute.
Into the 120Hz test, again on those same stressful levels, we can see frame rates hover between the 70s and 90s, but it can dip into the 60s still, and this is the worst case scenario, and the worst you could expect from both consoles. As this is a very scripted level, I can align both consoles and we can see almost identical GPU limited performance here. As per the 60Hz mode, visuals are identical, and aside a minor cut on things like alpha textures and bloom, resolution is the big cut, with it now dropping to approximately 2816 by 1584. Again, using a half reconstruction level, meaning we see 1408 by 1584. These can cause some issues on image quality, given almost a heat-like effect on shimmering and thin objects in the distance, but overall it's a minor sacrifice, and the fact still remains we are close to that 16 millisecond frame time to still feel very smooth on a VRR screen, but it does not offer a big increase over the 60 FPS mode on this worst case scenario. Again though, those open levels lean less on the GPU and likely a little more on the CPU heavy side. With all the bots and 8 millisecond target, we see much higher and thus faster and smoother performance. Much harder to align the action in these levels. I have followed the same section of high views, fast movement, combat and driving with destruction, and both consoles average into the 100 FPS range on frame rates, with the Series X offering a slightly better performance here in these open levels, anywhere between identical to approximately 12% faster to the Series X's favour, which means we see a PS5 average of 105.1 FPS versus 118.2 for the Series X. Although a real-world advantage at these high frame rates, it's more academic, as both feel very smooth and responsive to play and largely would go unnoticed. Although this is where VRR really shines. The 120Hz mode with no VRR is still great, but it does have some tearing, as you can see here with this 120 FPS footage slowed down. It's not that obtrusive as the frame persistence is low. For me, it's a no-brainer, although the hit to IQ can be noticed, specifically, like I say, those half-width instability and almost heatwave effects it can add. It is worth it for the fast controls the series is known for, and it still feels so good to play.
Let's ride! Your ship's full of hostiles. Never think to move. Vehicle's dead. Ascender cable.
Now, VRR is not required for 120 FPS on all consoles, in my opinion, but for Series S, it really is a key benefit and almost borderline requirement for the 60 FPS mode, which can struggle. Although these Warzone-like missions are less taxing, we do get much better performance now, often between the 70s and 80s and even higher. We get more tearing, and this means that VRR offers a tangible boost to input times and image quality, as all that tearing is removed in action, making the Series S version one of the cheapest ways to enjoy a cutback and certainly heavily impacted in that resolution stakes. Dropping now to a base 1920 by 1080, again using a dynamic or reconstructed base of 960 by 1080, and I even spotted some half height 540 areas. It may be scaling on both axes if the impact gets too high for the GPU. And this does come at a heavy quality cost. When you put all versions side by side, none of them look great in their 120 FPS mode from a stability stakes, but the Series S can look very noisy and unstable at certain points. Due to the low and reconstructed base, a lot of the effects can look washed out and incredibly dithered, and certainly on a 4K large screen. But online is where all these modes make the most sense, and for that, it's still great that the Series S has the same option to hang with those bigger boys, even if it's a little bit further down the path.
Behind the wheel! Heading to the next one!
Modern Warfare 3 is another fun, fast and enjoyable Christmas blockbuster, but it has always kept very close to that Hollywood rule of sequels. This year, even more than others, it feels like DLC to Modern Warfare 2, even with the same COD hub and campaign download packs as per the prior games. The engine tech is largely unchanged, but the art, sound and map design is still top tier. Across the current generation consoles, it stands up as one of the best and most improved games on a 120Hz and VR art screen, with the Series S really requiring both for a good, if not great, visual and performance balance. The PlayStation 5 and Series X remain the best place to play on consoles, with the Series X just pipping the PS5 in that 120Hz screen mode. My recommended way to play is with that enabled alongside VRR, and in both single player and multiplayer you will have your feet firmly on the ground, even if it feels like we have walked in these boots for a million miles already. And that's it for another combat-based console warfare. If you like what we do here on IGN Performance Reviews, then keep it IGN, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Watcher 1 to Bravo, ISR is overhead.